Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the 250 events in the life of Jesus. We're doing this chronologically through the Gospels, and today we're on part two of Jesus choosing the 12 disciples. And so we're going to continue here with James the Lesser or James the Younger that we have here, and he was the son of Alphaeus. Um, his name is on the mention of the listing of the 12 disciples, always appearing ninth in order for some reason, not sure why. Matthew also identified him as the son. The apostle Matthew is also identified as the son of Alphaeus, but most scholars do not believe that they were brothers. Just had this father had the same name. The title James the Lesser here or Little helps to distinguish him from the apostle James, son of Zebedee. I'm sorry, son of Zebedee, who was part of Jesus' inner circle, the three there that we've already looked at. So it was just James was a common name, almost like how James is a common name now. And then, although scholars argue the point, some believe James the Lesser was the disciple who first witnessed the risen Christ in 1 Corinthians 15:7. Not 100% sure there. It's just kind of a side note. And then we have a third James up here in the New Testament. And again, it's not the same James here. He was the brother of Jesus, and he's also the one who wrote the book of James that we have in the New Testament. The next one here is Jude or Thaddeus, right? He's referred to by both names that we see. Um, some scholars believe he is the same person as Jude, brother of Jesus, who is traditionally regarded as the author of the Epistle of Jude. The list of disciples we find here in Matthew Mark don't include Jude. Instead, we find a disciple named Thaddeus. So, not 100% sure there. Since the name Thaddeus was so infamous within the Christian church, it wouldn't be surprised if Matthew and Mark decided to use a different name for Jude here to try to distinguish. So, again, possibly the author of Jude, not 100% sure. Um, a literal translation of how Luke describes Jude is Jude of James. So it could be Jesus's brother. They're not 100% sure here. Um, but again, so we see that it's traditionally believed that Jude was martyred in Syria on his missionary journey with Simon the Zealot. Again, that's church tradition. That's stuff that's passed down. Again, that's not a lot of that's not 100% sure. Then we have Matthew or Levi, right? Son of Alphaeus, lived in Capernaum. He was a tax collector. We see that we're studying one of his books here. He wrote the gospel, like I just said, that bears his name, and he died from church tradition as a martyr in Ethiopia. Matthew was unlike the other apostles, who most of them were mostly fishermen, right? And so he could use his pen. Typically fishermen weren't literate as much, as much with writing and stuff like that. So Matthew was able to do that. And so he became one of the first people to present the world in the Hebrew language, the gospel, the teaching of Jesus that we see here. And so we'll learn more about Matthew as we go through the New Testament and study the book that he wrote. Then we have Simon the Zealot, right? One of the little known followers. He was called the Canaanites or the Zealots. They lived in Galilee. Tradition says he was crucified. Again, that's church tradition. There's not anything that's 100% sure on that we find in the Bible. The Zealots, they were a fanatical Jewish nationalist, right? And they had heroic disregard for the suffering involved in the struggle for what they regarded as the purity of the faith, right? And so they were zealous about the purity of their faith and who they were. They had a crazed hatred, right, of the Romans. Obviously, the Romans were occupying their territory, and it was the hate for the Roman that destroyed the city of Jerusalem. You see that if you read in history. Josephus, the historian who we've talked about already before, says that they were reckless persons, um, zealous, he said, in good practices, and extravagant and reckless in the worst kind of actions. Though, so they were just extremists, and honestly, maybe in depending on where they were today, in some instances, may have even been what line up with what we would call terrorists, depending on how you would say that. But I'm not going to call him. I'm just saying that's how zealous they were. That's where we get the word zealous from. That they were about what they knew. And so again, he was very passionate about who he was, and that's about the little bit of information we have about him. Then we have Thomas, right? He lived in Galilee. Tradition says he labored in Persia and India, and that he suffered martyrdom there near St. Thomas or Mount St. Thomas, India. Again, that's church tradition. Thomas was his Hebrew name. I believe the Greek name there is Didymus, is how you say that. And then Matthew, Mark, and Luke tell us nothing about Thomas. He's not in any of them, but for whatever reason, John defines him more clearly and writes about him in the gospel. And Thomas appears in the rising of Lazarus. We see that in John 11:2, or 11 verses 2 through 16, in the upper room in John 14, 1 through 6. And he wanted, that's when he got the name Doubting Thomas, because he wanted to know how the way where Jesus was going, right? And then he wanted to be able to put his hands in his wounds and see that. So and so we see in John 20:25, we see him say, unless he sees the nail prints, like we were just talking about here, and the gash and the spears, that he wouldn't believe. And that's why we get the name Doubting Thomas. And then the 12th one we have is Judas Iscariot, right? And he was the son of Simon, who lived in Judah. Excuse me. He betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. We're gonna see that as we continue going through the Gospels here. And then afterwards, he hanged himself. He was the treasurer, so he was in charge of the money for the disciples. The Bible also reveals here that Judas used the position for his own personal gain. We're going to see that in John 12:6. It states he was a thief, right? And as the keeper of the money bag, he used it to help himself, right? And so in the end, it was his love of money that ended up being his downfall. We're going to see that in John 12. And so after that, he was seized with remorse because he did turn Jesus in for 30 silver coins. He returned the 30 silver, and then he went away and hung himself. And to this day, the name Judas is known as a traitor. It's not something we see many people name Judas anymore because of that very reason. And so he was the one who betrayed Jesus, and we'll see that a little bit more. And then the 13th apostle, which, obviously Jesus himself didn't call, was Matthias. And he was selected to replace Judas. We see this in Acts 1:15 through 26, and we'll cover that a little bit when we get to it. But lots were actually cast to select Matthias to be chosen. And from then on, the Bible was really sparse on any additional thing related to Matthias. It says Matthias was with Jesus since his baptism until the resurrection. So that's the one thing about all the apostles, is they were with Jesus from the very beginning. And so in order for Matthias to be put up as a potential apostle, he had to have been with Jesus since his baptism, or since the beginning. And it only mentions him in the book of Acts. And so that's the only way we see Matthias. So that is I says Jesus chooses the 12. He originally did, but we wanted to cover the 13th apostle there as well. And so those are the 13 different apostles that we see. Again, we have a lot of information about some of them, especially Jesus' three inner. There's some that we just know mainly their name and maybe a little bit of where they are from, and that's about all we get. And so, again, don't know what happened with a lot of them after that, but we do see that these were the people who were entrusted with spreading the message of Jesus after his death and resurrection and ascension back into heaven. So those are the 12. Again, I appreciate y'all. Continue to watch these, stay along with them, and if you, I hope they're being beneficial. If you're learning something from them every day, if you haven't, please share these with someone who you think it would be beneficial for. Also, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, go ahead and subscribe to our channel. We're going to continue to be pushing stuff out like this. And as always, I appreciate you watching.